Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
You know, I've often said that one of the most powerful arguments for the truthfulness of the gospel are the changed lives and the remarkable conversion of individuals and their ongoing testimony. But one of the arguments sometimes against the gospel are the lives of individuals who claim to be Christians, and maybe they are, but they live very carnal, compromised, hypocritical lives. And so we're going to spend some time talking about that today as we talk about this new book, Why I Still Believe, a former atheist reckoning with the bad reputation Christians give a good God, and how important this is right now as we've seen some high-profile individuals say, you know, I really have such doubts that I'm not even sure I'm a Christian anymore. I'm walking away from the Christian faith. Mary Jo Sharp, who is the author, is a former atheist, came to faith in the Pacific Northwest. She lives up there now, but experienced this up there in the Pacific Northwest in kind of a post-Christian culture, then was transported into kind of a Bible Belt culture, and she's going to talk about some of that with us today. It's really kind of more of a narrative, but as you well know, she is an individual that has really worked in this area of apologetics, serves as the assistant professor of apologetics at Houston Baptist University. He's also the founder and director of Confident Christianity Apologetics Ministry. And you might remember that she and people like Nancy Pearcey and a number of others appeared on the cover of Christianity Today, The Unexpected Defenders. Might mention, by the way, that Nancy Pearcey, as well as J. Warner Wallace and Sean McDowell and Paul Copan and Mark Middleberg and Gary Habermas and all sorts of people have been on this program, have endorsed the book as well. It's published by our friends at Zondervan. And Mary Jo Sharp, welcome back to Point of View.
Hey, it's so good to be with you today, Kerby.
Let's, if we can, just take your story for just a few minutes. I've known bits and pieces of your story. This book helped me put it all together. I go to Oregon every single year. My wife is from there. One of my degrees is from there. And so that used to be the most secular state in the country. Now I think Vermont is, and I go to Vermont every year because I'm speaking in Vermont, usually in New York. So I know what it's like to be in this post-Christian culture, almost a secular culture. But in the midst of that culture and in the midst of your family, you became a Christian. But tell us the story.
Yeah, so as you pointed out, I grew up in somewhat of a post-Christian culture, so I kind of have to keep telling people that because my name's Mary Jo, which sounds very Southern, and I've spent a long time in the South, so people think that I was, raised around this culture of Christianity, which is more true to, a Southern feel in the United States. But that's not my experience. I tell people, there wasn't a church on every street corner. And I say to my Texas friends, nor a Tex-Mex restaurant on every street corner. They get that. There's one everywhere. So, so that's the cultural milieu in which I'm raised. People they aren't talking about Jesus to everybody. Religion's considered more private. They're a little bit more of relativist. And that's my background, that's my culture. But I grew up in a family who had left church when I was too young to remember, and didn't, my dad didn't turn back. He went full bore into just nature and science shows and into taking us camping on the weekend. And he was a huge fan of Carl Sagan. So I got a rich upbringing in nature and science and in a love of the things that humans could do through the sciences. But I also had parents who were very into the arts, and I have a music background. Mm-hmm. Actually have a music degree in my background. And So I was affected by not only what I was seeing in nature and the beauty I saw in the natural realm, and the power I saw in the sciences, like the raw power of the sun or the stars that were even more powerful than our sun. But I also was impacted by the beauty of what humans could do in the arts. And I began in my later years, when I was getting old enough to start to think about meaning, purpose, and value. I began to wonder what this was all for. We just live, we die, and that's all there is to it, because we're on this planet that's the pale blue dot in a far-off corner of the universe and relatively insignificant. And I began to wonder what makes me think that I have meaning, purpose, and value, ultimate meaning, purpose, and value. Where am I getting ideas like this from? What is this beautiful musical piece that we're performing? What is this for? And so at that point in my life, which I'm an older teenager, I have a high school band director who I greatly respect, who is burdened to share his faith with me, and he hasn't shared his faith with anyone. So this is stepping out. This is courage for him. He's got something that he's never done before, and he's a public school teacher, and I'm a student. So he's worried about getting in trouble as well. But he's so burdened for me that my senior year of high school, when I'm about to graduate, he gives me a gift, a graduation gift. And one is his conducting baton, which was very special to me as going into music. And then the other one was a NIV one-year Bible. And he handed it to me, and he said, when you go off to college, you're going to have hard questions. I hope you turn to this. And I was not sure what I would find in that Bible. But it did change things for me, and I started to read it. And what I found in the Bible was that source of meaning, purpose, and value, the source behind all that beauty, that it did make sense. There's an intelligence behind it. So I didn't become a Christian yet. I went off to college at that point, following a teacher from the University of Oregon. I went to college in Oklahoma. So I began to visit churches. It's funny because we talk about how so many kids leave the faith. They go off to college and they leave the faith. And here I was going off to college, and I was searching for faith, or searching for what this was all about. And I eventually, after visiting many churches, I eventually found one in which I heard the good news of the Savior for mankind, and that made sense to me. It made sense of my experience of goodness and justice and beauty and all these things. And so at that point, I was ready to trust Jesus for my salvation. That's how I became a Christian.
Well, and again, I love the fact that you say at one point, when you read the Bible, it was not this goofy portrayal of Christians found in The Simpsons, or some kind of piously romanticized view of clergy found in the old movies, and you saw some authenticity there. But when we come back from the break, I want to talk about that, because that leads right into the first chapter about hypocrisy. But also you mentioned beauty, because a little bit later we're going to get into that, because I know in chapter 9 you talk about beauty, and as an individual that backpacked all the way through California and Oregon and Washington and rode horses through Montana and things like that, I can appreciate that as well, especially when then all of a sudden you're at very flat Oklahoma and you don't have that around you anymore. And all of a sudden, people that you think should be mentoring you because they've been Christians for a long time, you're struck with their hypocrisy. And then you take us into questions about a variety of other issues, some of these deep theological issues like God and evil, but others as well. So we're going to get into this in a little bit more significance. It is a narrative in some respects, but it also, as you go along, teaches you about some other individuals that we've had on this program over the years. One in particular that I was talking about recently with our good friend Ravi Zacharias Nabel Qureshi. He shows up in here as well. So we'll talk about a lot of different things that I think you will enjoy. This is a book that might even be helpful to pass on to somebody that you're witnessing to who's an atheist that maybe would appreciate this journey, or maybe for someone that's got some real questions about whether or not Christianity is true when they look at some of the people that don't look like they're really very good Christians. So we'll come back and talk about that with Mary Jo Sharp right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, even though Donald Trump is no longer on the national stage as president, populism appears to be here to stay. Populism can be defined as the reaction when ordinary people feel that they're being disregarded by elite groups. Many events over the last few weeks are feeding a populist perspective. Consider the topic I discussed yesterday. An average group of investors decided to buy stock of GameStop in order to hurt Wall Street hedge funds. A digital distribution platform banned their account. Another locked their online trading accounts. All seem coordinated to help elites at the hedge fund. At the White House press conference, a reporter asked for a response from the Biden administration. The press secretary started by talking about Janet Yellen being the first female Treasury Secretary. They didn't want to talk about it because she was tied to those hedge funds. One headline writer had some fun at her expense by writing, "In historic first, Janet Yellen becomes first female Treasury Secretary to request ethics waiver for Wall Street speaking fees." She received more than $800,000 in speaking fees from Citadel, a hedge fund connected to the GameStop saga. Another story I mentioned yesterday is the story of Google, Apple, and Amazon deplatforming Parler. We can also add the decision by Twitter and Facebook to block the New York Post story about Hunter Biden's laptop. People were even blocked from talking about the story. So many average Americans feel like the political and economic system is rigged for the elites and against them. The populist perspective might wane if the elites begin to reform themselves and their institutions. But do you think that will happen anytime soon? I don't. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Mary Jo Sharp as we talk about the book Why I Still Believe. One of the chapters in the beginning was hypocrisy. You know, when we had Dave Kinnaman on this program talking about his book Unchristian, he points out that when you interview individuals that either were Christians and have left or aren't Christians in the first place, they say, well, I'm not because Christians are hypocritical, they're judgmental, they're anti-LGBT, they're anti-science, whatever it might be. But one of the ones that shows up and always has is hypocrisy. And you ran into that pretty quickly, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Actually, I think I quote David Kinnaman there in one of the chapters, one of those early chapters when I'm talking about hypocrisy, right, chapter 1. And so my first encounter, so I talk about my experience of being drawn to Christ through this great beauty and how I'm, the goodness in the world and the truth that I'm finding. So when I'm getting ready to go to church after professing faith in Jesus, my first experience of going to the church, I was married at the time. I was young married, and so I'm talking to my husband who has a background in Christianity, and I'm trying to figure out basic things like what to wear. I'm nervous because I'm entering a culture of which I'm unfamiliar. I'm entering into a Southern evangelical culture church, and so I'm kind of a mess of emotions. I'm really excited about my commitment. I'm worried about what people back home will think of me. This is a new environment. I feel like the new kid in class. And so I'm asking my husband, am I dressed appropriately? Is this great? I only own 2 dresses. I'm a poor college student. But so he's like, you're fine. Let's just go. So we show up to the church. And I include in the book just several instances from a pattern that I saw in the church, but this is one of those instances where I come to church on the first day. This is, that I'm a new believer, and this is when I'm going to profess to the church, that I'm a new believer and I'm going to join the church. And as we're walking in, the pastor's wife has positioned herself right at the sanctuary door to greet everybody. And I walk up and I'm expecting to get, I heard you came to Christ last week, and that's amazing. Welcome. But what I get instead was her smile dropped, and she said, the very first thing was, "Oh, honey, we need to get you better clothing." Not quite what I expected.
No, exactly.
Yeah, and it was confusing. And, what happens as that's one instance. There's much worse things that happen. But I think what was important to me in sharing that was that it was from the very beginning of my involvement with church that I began to see this sort of judgmentalism and hypocrisy that Christians would profess this moral standard, but they themselves wouldn't even live up to it. And that I saw a pattern of Christians doing this, and that began to cause distrust in me of people who said that they believed in God. And over time, I then began to transfer that distrust over into what is it that I believe about God. And I started to distrust God himself, and that led me to questioning whether or not he existed, why I believed what I did, and it launched me into a search for answers to the questions about God's existence.
Well, and also that's what led you into apologetics. I remember when you said, "I'm interested in apologetics," and Roger leaves the room to do some research on the word apologetics. What in the world is that? And in some respects, it was because you weren't getting the answers there. You talk about, for example, people raising questions and saying, well, what about this in terms of young earth, whatever. So I just believe. And it is something that, of course, led me. It was me reading, things like C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity, and things like that said, okay, this evidence is mounting up. And then you spend time in the church world where they really aren't educated in just the evidence for the faith. And they say, we just believe. Well, I need a little bit more than that. And if I'm going to share this with my friends, neighbors, and coworkers, my fellow students, I need a lot more than that. And so I know that's what launched you into that area as well.
Yeah, exactly. That was one of the things I saw in the church. And I know it sounds like we're doing a lot of condemnation towards the church, is just trying to share what happened and the experiences, and why I think some people do accuse the church of hypocrisy. One of those reasons is because of the lack of intellectual engagement with the questions of our time. And even when I would try to push people a little bit deeper on those questions, and not doing it in a way that was overtly aggressive, because I was a pastor's wife. So I was always very cautious about how I engaged in a Sunday school class or with other people. So, I would ask questions and people would push back, or they would get defensive. They wouldn't even tell me, I don't know, but let's see if we can find the answer. It was like you described, it was this sort of a feel of anti-intellectualism, and it was very unsatisfying for me. And I felt very alone because of that, specifically because as a pastor's wife, I didn't feel I had space to explore these kinds of questions.
Well, and again, when you saw people like, let's say, talk about a few, certainly that those that maybe were addressing some of those issues, like Craig and maybe a few of the others, I've mentioned Nabel Qureshi and others, for the first time you're saying, okay, this is helpful, and it's going to be necessary perhaps more, Mary Jo, than ever before, because there was a time in which we were sort of a Christian culture, and you just say, well, the Bible says, and everybody goes, okay. Now people go, well, why should I trust the Bible? Why do I even believe there's a God? Why do I believe there's any revolution? Why do I even believe there's any truth? And so we're going to have to be more able to answer those questions, don't you think, in the 21st century than we ever had to, say, in the 19th or 20th century?
Yeah, as the culture moves away from that Christian foundation, from that biblical truth, and even from understanding what that is, even knowing what's in the Bible or what Christians profess, we're going to have to be people who not only know what we believe as Christians, so we need to know our essential Christian doctrine, but we also need to know why we believe it. And apologetics really helps us with that, because it makes a case for belief in God, so that there are philosophical reasons, there are scientific evidences, there are some of these reasons out there for why we believe in God that, for me, I hadn't experienced in the church. I hadn't experienced anybody giving these arguments. And that was, I think, when it says in chapter 3, when I encountered my first debate, I'm so surprised to hear William Lane Craig making these arguments, because I'd never heard him before. But as you also mentioned, when I finally do go off to get a degree in apologetics as part of this process to answer my doubts, I meet people who are doing this, who are actively engaged in answering the toughest questions philosophically, theologically, that are out there, and that really impressed me, because I actually told Roger, I don't think I included this in the book, but I actually told Roger when I went off to Biola and I was in classes and all these people were spending all this money just to study these hard questions, I said, I think I found the church. They're hiding out in La Mirada.
What a great line.
He's like, Mary Jo, come on.
But again, to study with people like William Lane Craig, Gary Habermas, and all the others, I'm older than you, and so I can remember a time when it was Norm Geisler and I doing some debates, and then we had Ravi Zacharias, who was one of Norm's students, and now, I just look again at the people that are actually endorsing this. Of course, there was Josh McDowell, but now you have Sean McDowell, and you have J. Warner Wallace, and you have all sorts of other people, not to mention the fact that I mention you and Nancy Pearcey on a regular basis, because there used to be a time when, apologetics, that's for those guys, those geeks, those nerds, and there's no place for women. And I appreciate the fact that you and a variety of other women, by the way, at Houston Baptist and other places are addressing these issues, because we're going to have to really be ready to always give an answer of the hope that is in us. And in the past, that answer sometimes was fairly simple. Well, this is what the Bible has to say, and maybe here's some research you can look at. But now, given the fact that we're up against the disciples of the so-called new atheist, that the fastest growing demographic right now of the younger generation are the nuns, those people that on a survey actually say atheist, agnostic, or no preference, we're going to have to know these answers even more so. So we need to take a break. When we come back, I do want to encourage people during the break to click on your picture, because that will take them to confidentchristianity.com. And I first want to talk about some of the great resources that you have there, books and other events that are part of that, the blog. And then we'll get back into some of the lessons, especially one, lessons from a sociopath and an ex-Muslim. And then we'll get into questions of good and evil and a couple of other topics. And this is just a fascinating book that I think you will really enjoy, simply because it shares, if you will, the kind of spiritual pilgrimage of Mary Jo Sharp. It has about 230 pages. It recommends different books and articles and videos after each one of the chapters at the back, so there's some great material there. So it would certainly be useful for you if you wanted to study it individually. But I know many of you that are listening probably have a small group, or maybe you lead a Bible fellowship or a Sunday school class. This might be a book that you would want to run through, as there are a number of chapters that you can cover, 12 different chapters, and we'll come back and talk about a few of the others. And it is published by Zondervan. You should be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we also have a link on our website so that you can get it either in paperback or Kindle. And, of course, we also have a link to confidentchristianity.com. We'll talk more about what's on that website right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
for listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation with Mary Jo Sharp. The book is entitled Why I Still Believe. It is published by Zondervan. But if you'd like to know a little bit more about what Mary Jo Sharp is doing, you can go to confidentchristianity.com. And Mary Jo, for just a minute, let's, if we can, talk about what is available, because if people would like to follow your blog or listen to some other podcasts or maybe get some of your books or even schedule to speak, those are all available at your website, aren't they?
Yeah, they can go there and find, like you said, the blog where I'll be writing posts on various things that relate, mostly right now I'll probably be relating to why I still believe in the hypocrisy issue in the church, along with some apologetics arguments. And then also I do try to link to other sites. So just like in the book where there's a list of resources that go with every chapter, I'm always about trying to get people out to the other resources that are there. And then they can find all of my books there as well, so they can click on that to see what all I've written or written in, and then obviously also look at inviting me for an event if you'd like to have me come and speak specifically on these issues we're dealing with of hypocrisy, of deconversion and doubt, those sorts of things as well. So you can find all of that on the website.
Very necessary, because we've seen high-profile individuals sometimes say, well, I've just started walking away from the Christian faith. And so I think the material that you present is so valuable, and this book is as well. But let's talk about some of the kind of people we run into. Chapter 5 talks about lessons from a sociopath and an ex-Muslim. You go out to a Mexican restaurant, and these are kind of scary people if you think about it, but there are some ways in which they had a very significant ministry in your life, didn't they?
Yeah, so I did meet Nabil Qureshi and David Wood my first year at Biola University in their apologetics degree program. They have a 2-week residency required on campus, and so part of the degree you go and you stay there, and that's when I met the guys. These two guys' personalities were pretty much as big as their statures. I mean, they are, anybody who knows them will know that's true. And one of the things that David and Nabil taught me as I met them and got to know them and started to do work with them, some people don't know that, like David, Nabil, and I were doing debates with Muslims early on in my own ministry, and that David and Nabil kind of thrust me onto the debate stage myself. That's who's responsible. I blame them.
Yes.
And the things that I really learned from them, for one, I really was impressed that David and Nabil took my theological and philosophical ideas with respect. They really respected me for what I was thinking and how I was thinking, and engaged me. And that was not an experience that I typically had in the church, especially with my fellow Christian male believers. And again, I don't want to diss my men, but it was a new experience for me to be so respected for my ideas by these two guys. That was one thing that really impressed me. But the other thing that I learned from them, since the book chapter is entitled Lessons from an Ex-Muslim and a Sociopath, was that David and Nabil taught me a lot about the selfishness of my own heart, that I really didn't want to be a public Christian. I didn't want to be public with any of my ideas, because I was raised in a culture where religion was more private. These ideas were more of, well, that's good for you, but kind of keep it to yourself because I have my own thing. And so I didn't like the idea that I met these two guys. They had a public target on their back because they were debating atheists and they're debating Muslims. And being in the public light, what was nervous for me, or what made me nervous, was that you could say anything. People could say anything about you, and you can't control the narrative, And that was something that I saw that these two guys did not seem to care about in any way or fashion. They knew God was in control. They believed in God with all their heart, mind, and soul, and they were going full bore into ministry. And so they showed me that people and God were more important than having the world be the way that I wanted it to be, having it in my control. So those were two of the many things that David and Nabil taught me. Obviously, Nabil taught me a lot about Islam and sacrifice, his sacrifice in coming to Christianity, in leaving a lot of, his family behind because they were not happy with that. So there are a lot of things I learned from those two guys.
I would think so. One of the other chapters I did want to focus on debating good and evil, because first of all, that is one of the issues that has been a perennial issue for why individuals walk away from the faith or don't believe that there's a good God in the first place. And these debates put you in some difficult situations as well to deal with pain and suffering, and even in your own personal experience. Share that if you might.
Yeah, so this is an important one to bring up alongside hypocrisy as well, because first of all, the problem of evil remains as one of the greatest objections to belief in God. Hypocrisy is sneaking up there with it. That's why I really wanted to counter these two in a narrative. But so the problem of evil, in the book, you encounter it through my review of David's debate with an atheist on this very issue. And the atheist is asking this question about, the force of the problem of evil is related to the pain and suffering in the world. And for me, it's a difficult one to deal with because there's the theoretical aspect of it, and then there's the experiential side of it. So on the theoretical, we can give answers, and we can talk about why is evil in the world, how did it get here, how do we even define evil, how do we ground things like good and evil. But if we're talking to somebody who's currently suffering, they can look at us and say, hey, you don't know my suffering, you don't know what I'm going through. And so I'm always having this balance between the discussion on how do we ground things like good and evil, because everybody seems to believe in them and they talk about them as if they're real, like suffering is something that we shouldn't be, engaged in. We shouldn't suffer. And people talk with this sort of morally charged language when it comes to pain, suffering in the world. So it's a difficult balance to play. And when you present arguments from the problem of evil or why there's evil in the world and what God's doing about it, what he did through Jesus, sometimes we come across a little bit trite to people who are currently suffering. So my engagement with it is trying to walk through the fact that I know some theodicy. I know some answers as to why this is happening and to, how mankind has a good gift from God through free will and has used that in very destructive ways. In fact, it has led to our own deaths. But at the same time, I don't like the world that I see. I don't like the pain and suffering in the world. It bothers me. And so I say in the book, I'm never truly at home in this world with all this pain and suffering. And yet I know the beauty of what God has done in providing an answer to all of this. So it's just that balance of trying to handle the theoretical in light of the experiential.
And that's a good example of where we need to have some level of maturity and discernment, because when people ask that question, sometimes, it's out of a philosophical discussion, but most of the time it's out of some sense of pain. They've lost a loved one. They are struggling with some issue and they don't know how to address it. So you have to recognize there are different levels. And I mentioned C.S. Lewis earlier. He wrote The Problem of Pain to really address some of the theological issues related to how, if there's a good, all-loving, all-powerful God, is there evil in the world? Either he's not all-loving or he's not all-powerful or he doesn't care or something of that nature. There's an answer to that, and he gives a very good answer. But then you go to the book A Grief Observed, in which he talks about his own personal loss. And so you have to recognize that sometimes there's the philosophical answer, there's the emotional answer, and I think there is a sense of which some kind of Christian discernment and wisdom helps you understand which particular kind of answer you're going to give at that moment, and to do that with a great deal of compassion and sensitivity.
Yeah, definitely. And to remember, though, too, that for me, I had to set the experiences that I had with Christians in the church and their hypocrisy. The problem of evil just enlightened that for me as, this is why, that people they're going to continue to do wrong because we are all suffering. We're all in this situation. And so I'm going to continue to see the kinds of behaviors because this is a fallen human world. And the problem of evil really opened my eyes to saying, okay, but what do I believe about good and evil and where it comes from? What do I believe? Do I believe there is a standard to which we are all comparing everything? There's an objective point of reference, or do I believe that it's all relative to every individual? And I realized if I didn't have that objective reference point, no matter how I was suffering, no matter what was going on with my life, if I didn't have that objective reference point, I couldn't actually define things as actual suffering, as actual pain. I had no way to ground those ideas. And so that was encountering the problem of evil really helped me think through that and then apply it into my own experiences with the church.
Wow. Let's take a break, and when we come back, I think we'll come full circle because your chapter on the problem of beauty gets us back to, of course, something that was very instrumental in your salvation, but also because you and your husband have been able to return back to the beauty of the Pacific Northwest, you raise some other very important questions about that as well. And it's interesting that this issue of beauty is starting to surface even for those that speak to this issue of intelligent design as a real challenge. Matter of fact, that was something that apparently even Charles Darwin struggled with a little bit in The Origin of Species. We'll come back and get into that in more detail. This is all part of the book, though, Why I Still Believe, a former atheist reckoning with the bad reputation Christians give a good God. We'll continue our conversation with Mary Jo Sharp right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Mary Jo Sharp with us as we continue talking about her book, Why I Still Believe. And Mary Jo, I thought we might get into this issue of beauty. And I think really even surfaced when you had this particular course on cultural apologetics from John Mark Reynolds. Even more recently, we've had Dr. Paul Gould on talking about cultural apologetics. This is an area that I think we've neglected, but I really appreciate the fact that when you took his course and when others have talked about this importance of ethics and the value of beauty, just another aspect of something we can use to begin to bring about recognition of God's involvement in our lives. And sometimes we tend to do so many things from kind of a left hemisphere logical way. We ignore the right hemisphere cultural way. And as a musician, I think you certainly understand that as well as anyone.
Yeah, that was what Chapter 9 was on, was this sort of introduction to this argument in which I was drawn to God by the fact of beauty around me, and I was trying to figure out what it is for. What is this beauty for? And of course, as a teenager, I wouldn't have said it that way. That's me reflecting back on that time. But now I'm looking at it as I'm getting older. One of the things that shocked me when I got into the church was sort of a lack of attention to a theology of beauty, or what it's there for, or what we're supposed to be doing with it. And I explore in my book, I'm sort of a new person into this field because apologetics hasn't done a lot of work in this. This is not one of our, I don't even know if this would be a thing, but a mainstream argument that you would find in apologetics. We're getting more and more into it, but so I hadn't even encountered it really, and so I'm just encountering it through this book and through thinking on these matters through the program at Biola. And one of the profound things that one of my colleagues at Houston Baptist University said to me, Phil Talon, was, he said, in evangelical Christianity, we view goodness as objective, and we view truth as objective. But, this third transcendental of God as him being objectively beautiful, we have sort of relegated that over to a secular ideology that beauty is subjective to the individual. And he said one of the problems with that is that if God is really good, true, and beautiful, then we're missing out on some aspect of knowing God by not investigating what beauty is and what it's for.
And again, that's something that we are starting to teach more and more in these areas of classical Christian education, the value of painting, the value of music. And sometimes that is something that gets left out. Even in one of my books on art, culture, and media, we talk about that because there isn't sort of a category there. Now, if you're a musician, as you are, well, then we can play in the symphony or we can play in the choir, and that works just fine. But what about a painter? What about a sculptor? What about a variety of other individuals? They say, is there even a home for us in the church? And that's where I think we need to develop that. And so I was just thrilled that you had a chapter on that, and it's something I hope will continue to develop as we talk about cultural apologetics. But just before we run out of time, you have whole sections here on, of course, instructions on how to be human, but also, I love this, no tidy endings and even crash landing, because in some respects, we have to recognize as much as we want, and they lived happily ever after. Doesn't quite always work out that way, does it?
No, it doesn't. And that was one of the things that I wanted to show with the book was that, I've walked through these apologetic arguments, and I tried to show how they relate to the problems that I'm having in church and to the problems I'm having with myself, my own naivety, my own immaturity in my thinking. And I'm trying to show people that. But then at the same time, I felt like, at the end of the day, you can have these, and I've seen this happen, you can have these apologetic arguments, but you can still walk away from God, or you can still say, I don't believe. There's that factor of life is messy, and it doesn't always wrap up neatly for us. So I didn't want to just write a book where I'm like, here are the arguments, just believe, and everything will be fine. Because our experience tells us differently. That's not how it goes. And so that was one of the main things I wanted to do with no tidy endings, was leave it open, but really make a call to consider, in light of these deconversion stories, consider if you are having troubles with the church, if the church has been a painful experience, and you're ready to walk away. First of all, there's a call to really investigate what you believe, but in the sense of not just what are you leaving, what is Christianity, but I'm really calling people to consider an atheist philosophical framework. What does that mean for their lives? What is that view of the world, and what all does that entail? Because I'm not seeing a lot of people talking about what they are leaving Christianity for. I'm seeing a lot of what, I'm leaving Christianity because of, you listed a bunch of them at the beginning of the show, but they're not saying what they're going to, and then now how that looks in their life and how that plays out. So for the no tidy endings, I wanted people to, and that was also crash landing as well. I want people to consider, now you're crash landing back into your world. You've been through mine a bit. What are you going to do with this? And, how is it going to affect you, and where are you at? And so just really taking that into consideration.
And again, just well done. I think this book is a good antidote to some of those deconversions. But I'd be remiss, I know when I've had Dr. Sloan on the program, we always at the end talk about why individuals might want to go to Houston Baptist University. Can you give us a couple of reasons? Because one of those good reasons is to have a chance to study and learn from Mary Jo Sharp.
Yeah, that's right. There you go. Thank you, Kerby. And I grade all my own papers. So, we'd love to have you come. And one of the great things about our program is that it does have we have two different tracks. We have a philosophical track, and then we also have a cultural track.
Yes.
And so you can kind of have that emphasis either way, but also that it is fully online. So you can come to our degree program from anywhere in the world. And you don't have to set foot on campus. Now, you're welcome to come, because we do have guys like William Lane Craig who will come in and teach a week-long, study with you. But at the same time, some people just can't do that. They're just too busy, or they just can't afford to do that. So you can take this course or this degree program from anywhere in the world. And that's one of the things that's fabulous. And we have you've mentioned some of my colleagues, Nancy Piercy, Mike Lacona, and Jerry Walls. We have Phil Talon. We just have a great group of people there, just an incredible group of thinkers and scholars. And so, yes, definitely want to invite anyone to check it out at www.hbu.edu/MAA. Check out our program.
Again, hbu.edu. And you're now in the Portland area. Sometime I'll have to come say hi to you, because I'm always up there speaking at Cannon Beach and a variety of other places as well. But I would encourage especially our listeners in the Pacific Northwest that carry this program. This would be an opportunity for you to schedule Mary Jo to come there. But, of course, anyone across the nation, if you would like to have her come and speak, there are some great resources on her website so that you can contact her and find out a little bit more. And you can even watch some of the videos so you can see kind of the presentations that she would give. And I am just thrilled that God has certainly used you in a very effective way. And as we point out, even at one part in the book, it's good to have a few more women working in this area of apologetics. So I appreciate the fact that you have been such a very significant force in that regard. And I encourage all sorts of individuals to find out more by going to confidentchristianity.com. Of course, they can also go to Houston Baptist University. So, Mary Jo, it's always great to have you on the program, and I look forward to the next opportunity.
Hey, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
This book that we've been talking about with Mary Jo Sharp, Why I Still Believe, a Former Atheist Reckoning with the Bad Reputation Christians Give a Good God. It just came out. I think I noticed it was #1 on apologetics at Amazon. So it's another good reason to get a copy of the book. It is published by Zondervan. It's easy to find. It's available in paperback or Kindle. Well, let's take a break. And before we come back to the next interview, let me just mention we've got a number of things that always are available on our website. My Viewpoints commentary available today, so feel free to click on that. We also, of course, have an opportunity for you to listen to this again. Perhaps you'd like to pass this on to friends, neighbors. So again, you can go to our website, pointofview.net, find lots of great information. Let's take a break, though. When we come back, we have a lot more to cover right after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook. Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We have in studio, as I've been talking about, former Senator Jim DeMint. Of course, he also served in the House of Representatives and, of course, was also with the Heritage Foundation, now the Conservative Partnership Institute. And he is one of the authors of this book, Conservative: Knowing What to Keep. We have information about him and his co-author, Rachel, who we're going to introduce in just a minute. But again, Jim DeMint, over the years, we've had you in studio. We've been at various events at Values Voters where we've talked with you and had you by the phone. But it's just always great to have you in this new studio. So thank you for joining us.
It's just so great to be back. And I'm just so appreciative of what you've done for so many years to just be a voice of reason out across the country. And you're in 30-some-odd states right now, and I'm just honored to be with you.
Yeah. I just asked somebody, I think they said 42 states. So that's
42. That's well, I'm way behind.
We're trying to get the other 8. You know, I know one of them is Connecticut, and I used to live in Connecticut when I went to Yale, but, you know, we'll keep working on it. But let me also introduce Rachel Bovard, and she used to be with the Heritage Foundation, a graduate of Grove City, and also George Washington University.
Yes,
and it is just great to have you here as well.
Thanks so much. It's my pleasure.
And I'm going to throw these up, and it's going to be doubles tennis every once in a while. Sometimes she's got it, whoever. But I found the book very helpful because, first of all, maybe I'll just ask you, Jim, we are talking about people that say they're conservative and they really aren't. We're in the election season. You know it as well as I do. Every Republican running during the primary is a conservative. And then they go off to Washington, D.C., or they go to Albany, New York, or they go to Tallahassee, Florida, they go to Sacramento, California, they go to Austin, Texas. We find out they're not so conservative, right?
Exactly. And the main point of the book is to define what conservatism really is for Americans. We want them to know that it's not just about politics. It is about knowing what to keep. It is about those things that make our lives better. A part of that is keeping our faith, keeping our covenants as we the people, keeping our differences. We'll go through some of that today. But we can't build a national movement, a conservative movement, if people don't know what it is. And the left is trying to define it as hateful and bigoted and racism. And so many on the right are just talking about conservatism in terms of their preferred policies. But it's much more than that. And for Christians in this country today, it is a perfect fit with what they know makes their lives better.
Again, there are 12 chapters, and half a dozen of those knowing what to keep, half of those on knowing what to fix. And so we'll try to cover both of those. And if you find yourself saying, I'd like to know more, well, that's why we're talking about the book, and it is available. We have a link to the website, of course, the Conservative Partnership Institute, but also you can get it on Amazon and other places as well. And Rachel, let me come to you for just a minute, because one of the things I thought would be really relevant is we do a millennial roundtable. And even though these are really smart people that we bring in on Tuesday, I bet if I said, who is Russell Kirk, they'd all say, I'm not sure who that is. And it is something that we need to bring to this next generation, your generation. True?
Yeah, I think that's right. And if they didn't know Russell Kirk, it's because they didn't go to Grove City College. I'll tell you that much. But yeah, we spent a lot of time with Russell Kirk, who is the father of conservatism.
That's
for
true.
a lot of folks. Wrote The Conservative Mind.
That's right.
Really brought conservatism, from Edmund Burke in the 1700s forward into the modern era. And what we really try to do in this book is to rearticulate a lot of the Kirkian conservative traditions for this current generation. And, Kirk says that that's the job of conservatives. He says every generation needs to be reminded of what conservative principles are. And so we're sort of taking up the mantle humbly that Kirk has given us to do just that.
And I'm just thinking that Jim DeMint and I are about the same age. And when I was growing up in California, we had a guy that ran for governor by the name of Ronald Reagan.
Right.
And it's interesting because my father ran for the California Assembly in 1962, which is the year which Richard Nixon ran as governor. They both lost. And then he ran in 64, and that's when Barry Goldwater was running. They both lost. But then in 1966, something changed, and that is Ronald Reagan won, and my dad got involved in all sorts of other activities. But Ronald Reagan used to say that really this idea of America, the republic, conservatism, it's not passed on through the bloodline. You have to pass the baton on from one generation to the next.
Every generation has to fight for freedom. It doesn't come to us naturally. And this generation, and I think even a lot in our generation, don't know what those things are that blessed us so much as a country. And so what Conservative does, the book Conservative, is just help people look at the thing much broader than politics. The things in our civic society, our families, our communities, our churches, the things that really create the lives that we value. We need to know what they are and know who's trying to take them away. And more importantly, why are they trying to take them away? That's what the second part of the book is about.
Let's get to chapter 1. It talks about covenants. Rachel, let me talk about that for just a minute. If you've been to Hillsdale or Grove City or a few other places, maybe you could answer that. But you talk about this idea of an American covenant. And we many times around here talk about biblical covenants, but that's an important first chapter in the book, isn't it?
Yeah, it really sets the stage for what conservatism is. And it was actually Senator DeMint that really keyed into this concept of covenant. And I think it's so appropriate because the idea of covenant is simply that, we are in covenant with one another, right? We're in covenant with Christ through our faith. We're in covenant with one another through marriage. But as citizens, we're also in covenant. And I think that speaks to a lot of what we've lost in our modern political discourse. People aren't taking care of one another. They don't look at themselves as a country together. We've lost the unum in e pluribus unum to some extent, and that's a reflection of the covenant principle. And so that really leads into a lot of the other conservative principles because it starts fundamentally with this idea that we have a responsibility to ourselves and each other and the country, and that is the covenant we are all trying to keep. How we meet that out is our politics, but overall, this is the agreement that we need to keep.
And we talk about a social contract, but that's a very different idea, isn't it, than covenant, isn't it?
Very different because it doesn't have that mutual commitment that comes with it. And it's not a top-down phenomenon. And so much of politics today is dividing us all into groups, fomenting mistrust, trying to play one against another, and telling us that only government can save us from this other group. The covenant idea just is built from the ground up. All the little platoons that Burke talked about, helping us understand that we are fellow Americans. We may have different politics, we may be in different denominations or churches, but we have a covenant with each other as citizens that makes us one. It doesn't mean we're not different, but we are one as American citizens. And in fact, I think a lot of that, it still exists across the country. If you get outside of Washington, outside the media, Americans love each other. We work together. We go to school together. And it's only the higher ups who are trying to gain political power by dividing us by beliefs, by race, by gender. So this covenant idea is the very beginning of understanding who we are as a country. And it really goes back to the covenant God made with the people of Israel, with Moses, and the covenanting with God and with each other. And that gives us the civility to deal with all the things that we have to deal with as a society.
One of the chapters, of course, keeping our covenants and also keeping our faith. And we'll talk about that after the break, because, again, that's an important aspect of that as well. De Tocqueville and others will bring some of that to the conversation. Then also keeping our differences, keeping our republic, keeping our institutions and traditions. That's an important one. And keeping our land of opportunity. That's just the first 6 chapters. We'll try to cover as much as we can. But we'll do that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, even though Donald Trump is no longer on the national stage as president, populism appears to be here to stay. Populism can be defined as the reaction when ordinary people feel that they're being disregarded by elite groups. Many events over the last few weeks are feeding a populist perspective. Consider the topic I discussed yesterday. An average group of investors decided to buy stock of GameStop in order to hurt Wall Street hedge funds. A digital distribution platform banned their account. Another locked their online trading accounts. All seem coordinated to help elites at the hedge fund. At the White House press conference, a reporter asked for a response from the Biden administration. The press secretary started by talking about Janet Yellen being the first female Treasury Secretary. They didn't want to talk about it because she was tied to those hedge funds. One headline writer had some fun at her expense by writing, "In historic first, Janet Yellen becomes first female Treasury Secretary to request ethics waiver for Wall Street speaking fees." She received more than $800,000 in speaking fees from Citadel, a hedge fund connected to the GameStop saga. Another story I mentioned yesterday is the story of Google, Apple, and Amazon deplatforming Parler. We can also add the decision by Twitter and Facebook to block the New York Post story about Hunter Biden's laptop. People were even blocked from talking about the story. So many average Americans feel like the political and economic system is rigged for the elites and against them. The populist perspective might wane if the elites begin to reform themselves and their institutions. But do you think that will happen anytime soon? I don't. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, talking about this new book, Conservative, Knowing What to Keep. And a little bit later, we're going to talk about knowing what to fix. But knowing what to keep and the importance of faith. And in there, you use some good examples. You know, the Boy Scouts of America were the very center of American life. And now they're one of the most vilified organizations in the 21st century. You talk about Masterpiece Cake. And, of course, we could talk about all the individuals that we've talked to with, whether it's Jay Sekulow, certainly Kelly Shackelford and others. But these are all very important cases. And I think right now, wouldn't you say, Jim, that we are kind of in a balance between are we going to really understand the importance of religious liberty, or are we just going to simply see that as an excuse for anti-LGBTQ kinds of things?
It's an important time because I really do feel we're at a crossroads, particularly in Washington. And we point out in the book a number of the hearings that they have now for confirmation Christianity's on trial.
Yes.
I mean, they are saying you should not confirm someone if they believe Jesus Christ is the only way to heaven. And that's against the Constitution, yet they do it blatantly now in Washington. Russell Kirk said the very beginning of a free society and of conservatism is a belief in the transcendent order.
Right.
And in other places, he said a belief in a fixed moral code. And that is another thing that can unite us as a country if we all believe in this order. We might have different versions of God, different denominations, but if we all understand there is a transcendent order that we all are under, that is our master in effect and not the government, then we behave very differently as citizens. And it takes us back to the covenant idea, me, you, and God. We're going to behave very differently if it's me, you, and government.
Yes. And founders, I would think, Rachel, are individuals that understood that this would only work. A constitution really only works if you have a moral and religious people. Because if you have to have a police officer on every street corner and you don't have people doing the right thing without coercion, it's just never going to work.
That's right. And the founders really understood that it wasn't just one religion, right? It was this transcendent order. You had framers that were Unitarian, they were deists, they were Catholics, they were Protestants, but they believed in the idea that we still know to be true, that a religious society is full of happier people, more responsible people. They look out for one another. But the left, their religion now is atheism. It's a secular society. They want religion to have no place in it. And the role of conservatives is not to say you have to believe what I believe. It's that belief is good.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at right now.
Yes. Well, again, there are so many other points, but I want to keep moving because another one is keeping our differences. And that gets us into identity politics. Jim DeMint, speak to that, if you might, for just a minute.
Well, the left claims to be for diversity, but if you're around them at all, they want uniformity in almost everything that you believe in value. They try to make differences based on just color of skin or surface ideas like that, but they really do not tolerate differences of opinion. If you don't agree with them, you're wrong. And they are becoming vicious and even violent about people who disagree with them. They don't even want to consider the facts about any of their big issues. But conservatism is really, like Russell Kirk says, celebrating people's differences, promoting and protecting those differences. And that's how you live together in peace if you're all different. And your neighbors can be completely different from you, and you can be great friends as long as he doesn't tell you you have to be like he is. Mm. And that's the problem of top-down central management, particularly when the federal government is telling all the states and all the people that they have to do certain things. They have to go to certain schools. They have to have certain health care. They have the same. That's when people get tense. That's when they become divisive. But diversity is a core principle of conservatism.
We're going to talk a little bit later about what to fix, and part of that is the left. And even just recently, we had Dennis Prager sit in that very chair here, and he's made an argument that I agree with, that it is traditionally conservatives and liberals may have disagreed, but even our liberal friends, and I've had Alan Dershowitz on many times before, he would be the typical liberal, or Jordan Peterson has been on, and some of these people that would basically say, I may disagree with you, but I support your right to say that. Mm-hmm. And so that's been the case, and that's been the view that liberals and conservatives have had. But the left says, no, you don't have a right to that point of view. And any kind of view that strays even a little bit from the plantation is something that immediately will cause people to riot, to prevent you from speaking. And I've been the recipient of some of that on college campuses and things like that. And so, Rachel, this kind of new generation is saying, we don't want to hear this. We just want trigger warnings. We want safe spaces, and we don't want to wrestle with the big ideas.
Yeah, we call those snowflakes, I think is what we call them. But it is a really dangerous thing. You know, I think it reflects poorly on an understanding of what America was founded on, which is incredible diversity. We have one of the most diverse societies in the world. And that is a fundamentally conservative idea to protect that diversity. I think this generation, my generation as a millennial and the generation below me, they get caught up between conflating equality of opportunity with equality of outcome. Mm-hmm. And they don't understand that in the middle of that are people exercising their own individual choices and individual gifts. And that's what makes American society unique, is that everybody has a different thing to offer and everybody has a chance to offer it here. And we don't do a good job, I think, of communicating the value in that.
And again, one of those is Keeping Our Land of Opportunity. And one of the booklets I have is on capitalism and socialism. Why do I have this one? Because unfortunately, your generation, not you and not many of our millennial roundtable people, but a very high percentage of individuals who identify as Generation Y or millennials or Generation Z or the iGen generation say, you know, I think socialism is better than capitalism. I want to send them to Venezuela or Cuba to figure that out. But, Jim, that's kind of a generational thing. We're old enough to remember when we say socialism, we think Soviet Union, we think North Korea, we still even see China, a topic we'll be addressing in the future. But the younger generation says, oh, I kind of like Bernie Sanders. I kind of like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And so this is another great challenge for the 21st century, isn't it?
It really is, and it's harder for younger people, and we point it out in the book. You and I have the benefit of time. We've watched things, we've made our own mistakes, we've seen countries come and go. We know socialism doesn't work. Part of the problem that millennials have is not only have they not seen outcomes over time, but they have not been taught the mechanics behind the prosperity that we have right now. And we call it capitalism or free market economics, but they have different views of what socialism is. They really don't understand socialism in its real sense. And so it's been masquerading as compassion, as let's share and everything. But once you talk to millennials directly and younger people directly about what this means, okay, we're all going to get C's because some got D's and some got, you put it in their terms and all of a sudden they say that's not fair. That's the first thing that comes out of their mouth.
Yeah, it goes to a really good point, I think, that doesn't resonate enough. It's very, very easy in a socialist country to make everybody the same at the bottom. It is very, very hard to make everybody the same at the top. And so socialism, in its natural progression, distills us all down to the very, very bottom. And if that's where everybody wants to live, I highly doubt they do, but that is the logical conclusion of socialism.
And one of the things that you do, and I hold this up at least for people watching, it's just an unbelievable chart, and it's something we've talked about with many people, how because of a free market, the world's GDP or GNP, whichever one you want to use, is just gone almost exponential, and we have raised more and more people out of extreme poverty. So it is a time when we have perhaps the greatest economic development, the greatest standard of living, and yet, unfortunately for your generation, we have what I write about, what I call the deaths of despair. Higher suicide rate than even I had when I was growing up in Berkeley, California. We have individuals with opioid overdoses. So even at a time with tremendous blessings, just a lot of pessimism and depression and a belief that socialism is the way out.
Yeah, and this really gets back to what it means to be a conservative, because all of those things you cite, these despair, these are existential questions. These are philosophical questions about how we live together. The left's answer is everything is fixed by the government. Conservatives, on the other hand, say, no, there's way more important things in life than politics, and one of them is family, church, or community. All these things matter.
When, again, you also talk about this, and we'll get into this in the next hour, government is the answer. See, this is the government that supposedly had shovel-ready projects that weren't shovel-ready. This is the government that allowed veterans to die because of problems at the VA. This is a government that was supposed to make affordable care, because it was called the Affordable Care Act, and it doesn't look very affordable. And we think that more government is the answer. Bernie Sanders, call your office. I don't think so. Let's take a break, though. When we come back, we have a lot more to cover, and we've just barely touched on knowing what to keep. But we do need to spend some time talking about knowing what to fix. And that's something we talk about every day here on Point of View. And if you find yourself saying, I'd like to know more about the Conservative Partnership Institute, we have a link to it at our website, pointofview.net. If you'd like to know about the book, we have information and a link to that as well. And if, as you're listening to this, you say, I know somebody that needs to hear this, you can click on the button that says listen, and you can download the podcast and send it to them. Or you can click on the button that says watch. And of course, you can watch the live stream, or it'll also be on YouTube. You may know some other millennials that need to hear this as well. But we'll take a break and come back with more right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again as we talk about this new book, Conservative, Knowing What to Keep. Jim DeMint with us, Rachel Bovard. And again, if you would like to join us, you could maybe give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. But I suspect this is going to be one of those programs where I'm going to encourage you maybe just to sit back, listen, take some notes. Then maybe, since it comes very fast and furious, go and listen to the podcast again. Maybe send it to someone, and most importantly, get a copy of the book. Endorsed by a number of people, including Mark Levin and, of course, a number of other members of Congress that have actually written this, including Congressman Jim Jordan. So just a lot of great material in this book. And so I'm going to dive deep again. And one of the things that's kind of a theme running through this, Rachel, is tradition. Now, your generation sometimes said, why do I need to worry about the past? But tradition helps us understand how not to make the mistakes of the past. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think conservatives get a really bad rap for this. You know, people think of conservatives as sort of fusty. You can't do this, you can't do that. But that's not it at all, right? Conservatism, more than anything else, is a philosophy of gratefulness. And this is particularly true about tradition. We're really grateful for what people have done before, the hundreds of years of experience they've given us tackling the same problems, because human nature doesn't change. The same problems come up and up and up again. And so looking back at what's worked, what hasn't worked, and allowing that to inform the discussion going forward, that is essentially conservative. And so that's that concept. You know, Edmund Burke really talked about standing on the shoulders of giants and looking forward and taking that accumulated wisdom and using it to our benefit. That's incredible that we have that opportunity. And that's what's really exciting about being a conservative.
And that kind of gets into chapter 7, if you think about this, because it gets into this issue of good intentions. When Dennis Prager was here recently, he had an equation, GI minus W equals E, and that was good intentions minus wisdom leads to evil. And in this chapter, you talk about the fact that people have good intentions, but if you don't have any collective wisdom, I don't think too many people wake up each morning and say, now, how can I ruin the United States of America?
Right.
How can I ruin my country in Ukraine or my country in Hungary or wherever it might be? But if you don't have some sense of tradition, some sense of, if you will, wisdom that you gain, you sometimes, in trying to do good, do tremendous harm.
We've seen a lot of that at the federal government level. There are a lot of folks up there who have very good intentions and good motives. I'm afraid the left and the progressives have gone over to the evil side, but they're bringing a lot of good people along with them. But folks who want to do the right thing and don't have any of the knowledge of what's worked in the past or any respect for the things that have worked are likely just to take these new theories and ideas of, okay, how can we help the poor? Let's just give them money. Let's just give them housing. But if you look at it over time, we have not helped them. We've ensnared them and trapped them in dependency, and we haven't given them a way out. We've taken their dignity, and that's not right. It's not right for our country, and it's not right for the individuals. So if you really are compassionate, let's look at what has really helped people over time. And so it relates to raising children. It relates to being a community volunteer. But when you get at the government level, if you think the way I'm going to help is to get government to do it, I have not seen that work yet.
Again, the war on poverty and poverty won, right?
Yep.
You know, I mean, that's a good example of that. And it really gets to chapter 8 as well. And that is not just only good intentions, but one of the things you say there, and something we've talked about before, the left almost seems to destroy everything that it touches. And it isn't just in the political realm, because we also talk about how it's affected the cultural realm, and we could get into all sorts of transgender issues and cultural issues and sexual issues and gender confusion and all the rest. But just even back to government policies, in trying to do good, we've done a great deal of harm, haven't we?
We sure have. You mentioned the Boy Scouts. And the Boy Scouts were one of the foundational institutions in our country, and so many of the great leaders in our country and astronauts, business leaders over time have gone through this Boy Scout program. But over the years, they were attacked. Over 30 lawsuits. I wrote a book over 10 years ago, and I was so proud of them for withstanding that. But the government, the media, and particularly corporate donors eventually just wore them down. They threw out their moral code, and now they're on the verge of bankruptcy, and you don't see anyone from the left coming to help them, to rescue them. And that's what the left does. They tear things down. It's not enough for them to have the freedom to do what they want to do. They don't want others to have the freedom to do something else. And that's what we're seeing more and more today, is just a destruction of those traditions, those ideas that have held this country up for so long, and they're not putting anything in its place.
Rachel, I thought we maybe also talking about the need to get alternative sources of information. First of all, you write the Weekly Compass, which is available at the Conservative Partnership Institute. But whether it's that or this talk show or a variety of other outlets, if all you knew about what indeed the left wanted to do came from reading the New York Times or the Washington Post, then you would be concluding that that is the solution. But when you actually look at some of the other studies, matter of fact, some of the ones you did at the Heritage Foundation and others, you realize that in many cases, almost every time the left touches something, they ruin it.
Yeah. If all you read is the New York Times, you are in dire straits. You must think we are on the precipice of destruction based on everything they put out every day. We're actually doing much better than that. You know, Senator DeMint travels a whole lot. We hear from people all over the country that are very conservative at heart. They want to keep what's important to them, and they're grateful for the sacrifices that have made this country strong. But I think to that point, that's why it's so important to get outside of the bubbles that you're constantly in. I write the Weekly Compass email, which you can sign up for on our website, that tries to tell you a little bit about what's going on in Washington from a conservative perspective. But, you know, I write for a lot of conservative media organizations, The Federalist, Washington Examiner, American Greatness. These are all really good places to get a different view than the one you're getting on your cable news.
And so, again, that's one of the reasons we're doing this today here on Point of View. And if nothing else, one of the things that people have always appreciated, Babe, since you're authors, it's really nice to have an entire hour to try to talk about a book instead of, a 2-minute soundbite.
Thank you for that.
or all sorts of conversations about everything other than what's in the book. And so I thought we'd come back to one of the chapters there, the siren song of socialism. You know, we've already sort of addressed that. But, Rachel, let me stay with you for just another few minutes, because when you go and do surveys, and we've done some of those, and we ask people your age or younger, why do you like socialism? The word that comes up is equality. And I saw how the word equality was used to justify same-sex marriage, and I see how equality now is being used to suggest socialism. You pointed out that socialism can make everybody equal at the lowest rung, but it gets back to this idea of the equality of opportunity rather than the equality of outcome. Sometimes we might say, I feel like it doesn't seem right that some of these NBA players or NFL players make so much more than a hardworking teacher in the ghetto region. But once you have freedom, you're going to have different outcomes. And it seems to me that we should give everybody the opportunity to pursue their hopes and dreams, but that isn't going to give you the same kind of outcome.
That's right. And it really goes to the fact that we're not all the same person. And that should be celebrated. The left always talks about diversity, but they don't want you to actually have different gifts and use them accordingly, because that leads to different outcomes. But that's an incredibly important part of being conservative, is celebrating those differences and the ability to make choices based on the diversity that you have. C.S. Lewis makes a really good analogy to this in the Screw Tape Letters. If anyone's familiar with this book, when Screw Tape is training the next generation of devils, he said the first thing you have to do to get at their souls is to make them all equal. Because you take a scythe and you cut off the tall wheat and you make it the same as everybody else, and then they just stop caring. And they don't care about anything anymore.
A lot of wisdom there.
Yeah, C.S. Lewis. And one of the things I want to talk about, maybe when we come back from the break, is you also have a whole section here on some of the policy failures. We've already talked about the war on poverty, but I'd like to get some thoughts maybe from you, Jim DeMint, about the issue of education and, of course, health care. And, of course, we can also talk about climate change, another one of those topics that we've addressed. But it does seem to me that this is a classic illustration of trying to do good. We've done a great deal of harm. And I just cannot, even as we look at the various elections, see how anybody looking at the cost of Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, trying to make sure that we provide all sorts of benefits for people in terms of child care, make sure that we can forgive all college loans. Rachel might like that one, or a variety of others, or reparations, and not just reparations for African Americans, even reparations for LGBT and all the rest, how people don't look at that and go, That makes absolutely no sense at all. So let me just take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about this. But as we mentioned, you can go to conservativepartnership.org, and we have a link there on the website. And, of course, you can get a copy of the book, and that is available there. We also have that as well. We also have some of the endorsements that have come from Senator Mike Lee and Representative Mark Meadows and Jim Jordan and Mark Levin and a variety of others. But if you'd like to get that weekly compass, I'm going to sign up for it, and I'm going to find out what Rachel is writing about. That's another one of those maybe must-reads for everybody, so you can sign up. All you really need to do is just put your name there, your zip code, and your email. You can join and find out a little bit more about that. And, of course, if you'd like to really learn about this topic, this is a great book to get that information. So we're going to take a break and talk about some of those policy failures right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes talking about conservative, knowing what to keep, and, of course, also the Conservative Partnership Institute. We have that link on our website. Jim DeMint, let me come to you for just a minute. Chapter 10 talks about these policy failures on the left. We've mentioned some like poverty, but what about education? When we got the federal government involved in education, and I remember at the time when Jimmy Carter created a Department of Education, right. And then the Republicans said, we're going to get rid of it. And then we put Bill Bennett in there and said, well, we kind of like Bill Bennett. And Gary Bauer was there for a while until he went to the domestic policy, and we didn't get rid of that. I think federal government's involvement in education has done more harm than good. What's your thoughts?
There's no question about it. And we cannot maintain a free society if the education of our children is managed by our government. It's completely opposite. We're supposed to hold the government accountable, but yet we have the government running our public schools and essentially our universities through the grants and funding process. But the solutions are so clear. We have so many examples now that states are doing things that give parents more choice. And the idea of education savings accounts opens the door for Christian families to use money without any government strings to actually send their children to a place that will help them raise their children under the admonition of the Lord. And every church in the country could easily hire a teacher or two, and whether it's a class of 20 or several hundred. But you also could have all kinds of different schools that specialize. It would attract a lot of private sector money investing if you created a mall of education where kids could go. We don't have to be strapped to government-run schools. And as long as we do, and if people don't understand this, even if they think their school is good, the national teachers unions, which are socialist at the leadership level, are driving public education in America. And it's really the socialist left that's driving a lot of higher education as well. So we have numerous states now that have done various versions of charters and magnets, and we can see that every time they do it, you create better options for students, but also public education gets better. So we're not eliminating something that parents want, but for heaven's sakes, let's stop doing something that has failed since that very time Jimmy Carter intruded the federal government into education.
And a lot of times people do say, Jim, that, this is a good teacher. But my argument is, put a good teacher in a bad system, and the system wins. And that's really what's happened. There may be good teachers, but the system just drives it in the wrong direction. And, of course, the teachers' unions do as well.
Yeah, we can't expect 2 hours of church on Sunday and like 40 hours of secular education that our children will grow up without conflicted ideas of what is real in the world. And that really pains me, because you might have a very good teacher, but if everything is taught within a secular setting, the biology, creation, everything, our children are not going to grow up with confidence in their faith.
Yes. Rachel, Jim mentioned something just in passing, and that is some of us remember when people like Ronald Reagan talked about the states being, if you will, laboratories for democracy. And we see that with education. I just wrote something recently about some really significant changes in health care and health savings accounts in Indiana. Who was the former governor of Indiana? Oh, I think it's the vice president.
I think it rhymes with Mike Pence.
Yes. And it's just, I think there's a good example of sometimes we find things work at the state level. Let's make it national. Our friends on the left, they want to just have everything from a national point of view, and oftentimes implemented by people that have never run a business and really have never even been in a think tank to actually understand the implications of what they've just implemented.
Yeah, and it goes back to the fact that they want to make us all the same. They think we are all the same. And that's one of the beautiful things about our federalist system, is that it recognizes that we're not. It recognizes that people in Montana have very different needs than people in New York. We have a system that reflects that. And it really is something to be grateful for. We can experiment at the state level. We can learn from things that work and don't work. Look at California implementing all these policies that are actually making their residents flee to other states because they're taxed to oblivion and they don't like their policies. That's good to know. That maybe the rest of us don't want to live under those scenarios.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, they're paying a lot more for gas, and that's because they're more dependent on Saudi Arabia oil than anybody else. As an individual who's born in California and understands that it's a very different world than when Ronald Reagan was the governor. I mean, they're closing down refineries. They are not drilling new oil wells. And so they're paying a lot more for gas than the rest of the nation listening to this broadcast right now. And that's just one good illustration. But we're just about out of time. And you have a whole section here on, the flourishing of society and the need to get involved. And one of the booklets I'm going to put out again, Making Your Vote Count. It seems to me, Jim DeMint, you've been on the receiving end of various campaigns and worked in other campaigns. You worked in advertising, but you recognize that if we could just mobilize even just the listeners to Point of View to make sure that they are registered to vote, and I suspect many of them are, but then to get their friends, neighbors, coworkers, and family members registered to vote, and then to turn out to vote, these ideas would be implemented instantaneously, and we wouldn't be fighting some of these battles we're fighting right now on Capitol Hill.
You're exactly right. And I've seen data, and I think it's right, that over half of folks who go to church, evangelical Christians, don't vote. Yet we sit on the sidelines and complain about it, and we expect things to work out. Or maybe we believe that politics has nothing to do with our families, our faith, and our freedom. But I can tell you, it does. And we cannot allow the country to continue to go on an unsustainable course. And it really is, fiscally, culturally. I just would encourage folks to register to vote, plan to go out, but like you said, just encourage someone else to go. Take someone else, make it a thing in your small group or your church or the people you hang out with. If we could just get good common sense Americans to vote, I think we could turn this country around. And I hope folks will read the book just to find out what it is we're trying to do, what are we trying to keep, and how does that translate into policy.
Yes, and anybody that has any doubts, you can go to our website. I've been collecting over the years some of the closest votes in American history. Had somebody sitting in that chair the other day that won by 30 votes, so he recognizes. But I did have an individual I used to work with when we were on Moody Broadcasting, and it actually ended up to be a tie. And so they flipped a coin, and she lost. And then she went to church that Sunday and said, "Oh, if I'd only known that this was going to be that close, I, was working late at work and I didn't bother to go to the vote, and or I was out of town." And she identified 30 people in her own church. If just one of them had voted, she would have been reelected in the Illinois legislature. So don't tell me that one vote does not matter. Rachel, just before we run out of time, let's, if we can, real quickly talk about what's available at your website. And again, I would encourage people to just click on your picture there, and we have information at conservativepartnership.org. And if they scroll down, they get the weekly compass. What is that all about?
Yeah, so it's a weekly email that I write based on what's going on Capitol Hill that conservatives should care about from a House and Senate perspective. So if you want behind the curtain, inside information, sign up for my email.
Again, conservative, knowing what to keep. Senator Jim DeMint, it's been great to interact with you over the years, and thank you for the work that you've done first in Congress, as well as the Heritage Foundation, and now, of course, at the Conservative Partnership Institute. And Rachel, just great to meet you. Can we get you on the Millennial Roundtable in the future?
I would love to.
Okay. Well, it has been just a great opportunity to hear from them. And again, if you would like some more information, click on the button that we have there. It says conservativepartnership.org. And again, there is this opportunity for you to sign up, and I'm going to do that in just a minute, the Weekly Compass, and then you can find some of their material. But if you say, I really want to pass this on to some individuals, go to our website, pointofview.net. There's a red button there. One is listen, and you can download the podcast even right now, send it by email to somebody that you think needs to hear this, or you can watch it or even go to the YouTube channel a little bit later and pass that on, because as we've pointed out before, there's a whole generation of young people that don't know these values, and so we need to pass them on to them. So thank you both for being in the studio. We've got a lot more to cover. We will do that right after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
As we've been promoting, we have in studio with us today Ruth Graham. New book out, Forgiving My Father, Forgiving Myself. And I might just mention, of course, you know her, of course, as one of the daughters of Billy and Ruth Graham, but also the author of In Every Pew Sits a Broken Heart, of course, the award-winning Step into the Bible. And this book, which I think you're going to find really helpful in terms of the issue of forgiveness. And we're going to be talking about that this hour. And if you'd like to join us a little bit later, we might open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. We have information about our Ruth Graham Ministries on our website. We have information about this book. It's published by our good friends at Baker Books. And Ruth Graham, it's just great to have you in studio.
Thank you. The book is just out today, hot off the press.
That's why we wanted to do it today. I knew that its release date is October 1st. That's and right. If you look at the calendar, that's today. Thank you for doing that with us. And it is just a delight to have you here. And we're going to be talking about forgiveness, but I love how you start the first chapter. I mentioned this to you just before we got on the air, that somebody that has been sitting in that chair is Burl Cain, who was the warden for many years at Angola. And a number of years ago, when it was Ruth Graham and Friends, you were actually at the Angola prison. And tell a story about Michael. First of all, it's incredible what's been happening behind those prison walls in terms of educating people about the Bible.
That's right.
And I know you've been following that as well, haven't you?
I have, and it's not just Angola. There are prisons across the nation that are involved in bringing the Bible school and seminary into prisons, and the men are then able to graduate. And I've attended a graduation, and the faculty comes in full regalia, and they do the pomp and circumstances, and to see families sitting there who for maybe hours sat in a courtroom, so disappointed, heartbroken over their uncle, their brother, their son, to sit there this time with smiles beaming across their face and with such pride that their son, uncle, brother is graduating from Bible school. Just fabulous. And the change in their lives. And then they're sent out as missionaries to other prisons. It's a fabulous ministry.
It certainly has. And we've featured them in places like Indiana and Texas and Louisiana, a number of other places. And we certainly want to salute those of you that are involved in prison ministry. But I use that to tell the story of Michael. Yes. And I'd love you to tell that story, because it really underscores this whole idea of forgiveness, doesn't it?
It does. It opened my eyes. I was invited to Angola with my team, Ruth Graham and Friends, and they were psychologists, pastors, people who had really dealt with issues of the underbelly of the church that nobody was talking about, whether it be divorce or abuse or pornography, whatever. And Burl Cain invited us to bring that to the prison.
Very good.
And I went, and the press followed me. The national press followed me. And we got to speak there 5 different camps with 1,000 men in each. And these men are there for life. By and large, they're not going to get out unless they die or something unusual happens. And so we went, and while I was there, Burl asked me to go death row. And I thought, going to prison is one thing, but death row is a whole different thing. But I thought, I'm here to minister to these men, and it's not about me. So that morning we got up and we went, and we stood outside the gate and all the razor wire and all the gates and stood there, and the gates clanked open, and we walked through the one gate, and the clank closed, and it locked behind us. And then the next gate opened, and we were there on death row. And they pointed us down this corridor. It's a concrete corridor, so our footfalls echoed through the building. But we divided up. so that we could talk to as many prisoners as we could. And the first prisoner I came to was a short young man. He was a young man. And he stuck his hand through the bars to shake my hand. And so I shook his hand. And we talked for a bit. I asked him about his family. And I had no idea why he was there or what his story was. He didn't know my story except that I was Billy Graham's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked for a minute. And then he stepped back and he said, "Can I sing you a song?" And I said, "Certainly." And he stood back and he took in a deep breath and he sang a cappella, "It is well with my soul."
Yes.
And I knew it was well with his soul. It was a very tender moment. And we talked for a little while later. And then he said, "Can I give you a gift?" And I thought, what did this man have to give me? I was there to give him something, and he was giving me something. So he slipped back and reached under his pillow and reached out for a little woven cross, a cross that he'd made out of threads from his bed sheets. I still have it. It hangs in my house as a reminder to pray for those men. And he gave it to me, and we said goodbye, and I prayed with him. We said goodbye, and I thought that was the end of the story. Well, like I said, the national press carried this. And about 3 or 4 weeks later, I got an email from someone, and he said, "Did you really go to Angola's death row?" And I emailed back, "Yes." And he said, "Did you meet Michael?" And I emailed him back, and I said, "I really don't know. We met so many men. Let me ask Burl Cain." So I called Burl, and he said, "Yes, you did meet Michael." So I emailed this man back, and I said, "Yes, I did meet Michael." And he said, "Do you know if he's a believer?" I said, "Well, I better check with Burl again." So I called Burl, and he said, "Yes, he is a believer, and he's scheduled to die this month."
Wow.
And I thought, oh, my. So I emailed this person back, and I said, "Yes, he is a believer, but why are you interested in this young man?" And he wrote back, and he said, "He murdered my granddaughter in a brutal way."
Yes.
And I thought, oh, my goodness, what does he want with this? And he said, "I want to know that he's going to be in heaven with me when I get there." And I thought, boy, my shallow of understanding of forgiveness did not touch that.
Yes.
And I thought, I need to really rethink this. And we left that day. And later, I got another email from this man, and he said, "I'm a missionary in Nepal, and I want to know that when I die and I go to heaven, that he will be in heaven with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I am sure that when Michael stepped into glory, there was a little girl waiting for him."
That's such a good
and
story.
It's only God can do that. That is a miracle of forgiveness. But I realized that my understanding of forgiveness was so shallow.
Yes. Well, and we've heard some of these stories, for example, when the attacker went to the Amish and they forgave the attacker. And we've seen many various court cases where the family has said, "We want to speak to the accused and we want to say, we forgive you. We are horrified by what you've done to our son, daughter, grandson, granddaughter, wife, whatever it might be, but we forgive you." And so it just sort of underscores what's in this book. And we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about that because you have a whole section on what forgiveness is not. We're going to get into the whole question of sometimes when forgiveness is really hard because you're talking about an abuser. And one thing about Ruth Graham is you're one of the most transparent people I've ever known because you tell your own story here as well. And anybody out there thinking, well, if you're the daughter of Billy Graham, you must have had an idyllic life and no problems with marriage, no problems with infidelity, no problems with infidelity, no problems with divorce, no problems with any kind of conflict or abandonment issues. You're not paying attention because we're going to come back and we're going to actually work our way through the book. And again, I would encourage you to get a copy. It is just out. Let me just hold it up. And it's about 200 pages. It's published by Baker Books. You should be able to find it in your local bookstore, but it's just out today, so it may take a while to get there. A couple of great endorsements by people that have been on this program many times with us before, Sean McDowell, Mark Batterson. And so we'll come back and talk about forgiving my father, forgiving myself, all that coming up right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, even though Donald Trump is no longer on the national stage as president, populism appears to be here to stay. Populism can be defined as the reaction when ordinary people feel that they're being disregarded by elite groups. Many events over the last few weeks are feeding a populist perspective. Consider the topic I discussed yesterday. An average group of investors decided to buy stock of GameStop in order to hurt Wall Street hedge funds. A digital distribution platform banned their account. Another locked their online trading accounts. All seem coordinated to help elites at the hedge fund. At the White House press conference, a reporter asked for a response from the Biden administration. The press secretary started by talking about Janet Yellen being the first female Treasury Secretary. They didn't want to talk about it because she was tied to those hedge funds. One headline writer had some fun at her expense by writing, "In historic first, Janet Yellen becomes first female Treasury Secretary to request ethics waiver for Wall Street speaking fees." She received more than $800,000 in speaking fees from Citadel, a hedge fund connected to the GameStop saga. Another story I mentioned yesterday is the story of Google, Apple, and Amazon deplatforming Parler. We can also add the decision by Twitter and Facebook to block the New York Post story about Hunter Biden's laptop. People were even blocked from talking about the story. So many average Americans feel like the political and economic system is rigged for the elites and against them. The populist perspective might wane if the elites begin to reform themselves and their institutions. But do you think that will happen anytime soon? I don't. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
In studio with us today, Ruth Graham, and again, just an outstanding book, Forgiving My Father, Forgiving Myself, just out. So be looking for it in your local bookstore. It may already be there. We also have a link, of course, to Ruth Graham Ministries. You can get the book there, and also some other resources if you want to get it in hardback or Kindle. And forgiveness is an important issue. And one of the things you talk about, Ruth, is forgiveness isn't fair. For our listeners out there, as we've over the last couple of weeks sometimes talked about abuse and we've talked about dysfunctional families, sometimes people say, well, it's not fair that I should forgive somebody because of what he or she did to me. But that's not what forgiveness is contingent on, is it?
No, it's not. And you just have to ask Jesus how fair forgiveness is.
Yes.
It was as he was being nailed to the cross that he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Talk about grace. Talk about heart of love. Forgiveness is not about us. It's about God and the opportunity to enter into his very character and nature. And that's a sacred thing. That's a holy moment. That's a sacrament. And we talk about forgiveness being a letting go, a gift you give yourself, a way to get healthy emotionally. And while that's true in all the cases, but it really is not about us.
Yes.
It's about God and his character. And that's what I wanted to bring out in this book, that it's really his character being formed in us. And that's really what we want.
Yes. You know, we had Max Lucado here just the other day because his new book is on happiness, and one of the chapters is on forgiveness, and he'd actually preached at my own church on that subject. And I have always said to individuals, forgive someone else, even if you don't do it for any other reason, then it helps you because it removes these burdens that you've been carrying for years. And one of the things I appreciate about Ruth Graham, and there are many, is the transparency that you come and you talk about in the book that you really hadn't had a chance to think about forgiveness until about the age of 36. And you've heard the phrase, time heals all wounds, but actually time buries all wounds. And all of a sudden, a lot of things surfaced when you were 36 years of age. Explain that, if you might.
My husband had been unfaithful for years, unbeknownst to me. And I was absolutely, the rug was pulled out from under me. I was just heartbroken and didn't know how to deal with it. And nobody else in my circle knew how to deal with it. They sort of wanted me to cover it over and keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to do that. I truly tried to do that for about 3 years. And my wheels came off. I became depressed. I was angry. I was bitter. And I just was losing a grip. And I was just not knowing what to do. So I remember one day my children were swimming in the pool with my pastor and his wife. We were all together. And my husband said something to me. I don't know what triggered it, but the anger just roared out. I mean, I didn't care who heard me. I don't care what I said. I just was angry, blinded with this rage. And my pastor and his wife were very good about ushering the children back to their house. And I just let my husband have it with both barrels because I'd tried to cover it up for too long.
Yes.
And I hadn't gotten it out. And I have since asked God to tell, my husband died shortly after we were divorced, but I have asked God to please tell Ted that I forgive him.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's no theology for that, but I leave it to God, and I will see Ted again, and I will be able to ask his forgiveness then if it matters. It may not matter at that point, but I just, it was a real rough period in my life, and I didn't know where to turn, and I was looking for security. So I entered a rebound marriage, a very ill-advised. My parents both told me not to do it.
You were down there with Gigi at the time, I think.
I was living close to them, and they introduced me to a handsome widower.
Here we go.
And the pastor introduced me to the handsome widower, and I thought this was ideal. My children didn't like him, but I thought they were almost out of the house, and what did they know? So I was going to do what I wanted to do, very much like the prodigal son. And I was he asked me to marry him, and I said yes, and after 6 months of knowing him, I married him on a New Year's Eve. My father had called me from Tokyo. My mother had called me from Seattle and said, why don't you slow down so we can get to know this man?
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted someone to take care of me. I wanted to feel secure again. And so I married him on a New Year's Eve. And within 24 hours, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake.
That's right.
I became afraid of him. And I fled. I wanted to hide.
Yes.
Wanted to run away and hide.
Well, one of the things I want to get to is in chapter 5, it's about grace, and you talk about this drive to go see your parents. Now, again, just put this in your mind, okay? This is now the second marriage that has not been positive. You are the daughter of Billy and Ruth Graham, and you're driving up there wondering, what am I going to encounter? And what you encounter is a father who says, welcome home.
Mm-hmm. I shared that story at his funeral. Many of your listeners may have seen that.
Mm-hmm.
And because I felt that was the essence of who my father was. He was the most gracious, forgiving, loving man. He loved us all unconditionally. And to me, that showed not only who he was, but he showed me what God was like.
Yes.
And certainly my father was not God, but he showed me what God was like that day and changed my life.
Yes. Well, while we're talking about your father, you wrote kind of a difficult chapter about the fact that your father was always gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you wrote it in the right way because you didn't want to be critical of him and you take a responsibility for your actions. But when your father is gone 50% of the time, and then when he's there are all the staff around, and you even quote one of these individuals saying that if you're a president, you never really have intimacy because you always have staff around. He always had staff around. You had the feelings, as would be understandable, of abandonment, and that surfaced some of those issues, didn't it?
It did, and little did I know that. I had no idea that was one of my issues. But I was, after the fourth marriage ended in divorce, I was talking with a friend, and I was beating myself up and saying, why do I keep repeating this? What is wrong with me? And he looked at me and he said, Ruth, he said, as a little girl, you felt abandoned. I did not want that to be true. My father is my hero, and I love him dearly. I did not want that to be true. But the piece fit the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
I finally realized why I kept doing the same thing over and over again. And that was amazing to me. But I don't blame my father. I really don't. And I don't blame my mother.
But again, I recognize that one of the things I've said sometimes, you get to the point where you're as old as we are, that you start mentoring and discipling. And I meet some of these people at a seminary, a Bible college. Next week, I'll be teaching at a Bible institute. You see some individuals that start getting some notoriety. And the first thing I say is recognize that God gave you a family.
Right.
And he also gave you a ministry. And sometimes you've got to figure out what those priorities are. And over the years, there have been times when I've said no to things that would have advanced a career, but sort of learning some vicarious lessons from individuals whose fathers were very famous. And matter of fact, one of those, I've gotten to know, and of course I've known Josh McDowell for years, and I know Sean McDowell. There are some individuals that find themselves in a situation where it's easy to feel like maybe I've been abandoned, even though they do all they can when they're there. And so it's something to even learn a vicarious lesson as you are pursuing a ministry or pursuing a business or career, to begin to think about what is most important, right?
Well, this is a conversation that evangelicals need to have, because certainly back in the 40s and 50s when my father just started, he was filling a void that had been left by the social gospel.
Right.
People were not doing evangelism, and my father stepped into that void. And there was so much. It was a unique ministry. He was a unique man at a unique time. And I understood that. I really did. And I still do. But God gave him family. And he was gone. And he wrote even in his memoirs that he knew that they had those absences had repercussions in his children's lives. And particularly me, as the middle child, I was more quiet, more compliant.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't make myself known. I didn't demand attention, and I didn't get it. And there was never any time for just intimate time with my father. And I missed it as a little girl.
Yes. Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we are going to continue our conversation with Ruth Graham. I want to get into a couple of things. First of all, people misunderstand how forgiveness and reconciliation fit together and the need for some discernment. And you have a whole list of things that forgiveness is not, so I wanted to get into those issues as well. And, of course, blessing, not bitterness, and we'll use a couple of examples, whether it's Judas and Peter or whether it's Isaac and Jacob and Esau and some others. We got all sorts of things to cover. So if you find yourself saying forgiveness is an issue that I'm dealing with, or it's an issue that I know somebody is dealing with and would really benefit from this book, Forgiving My Father, Forgiving Myself, and it's just out today, and it's by Ruth Graham. And if you find yourself saying, well, I'd also like to know more about what Ruth Graham is doing, click on the button there that is at pointofview.net. Click on her picture, and it will take you to ruthgraham.com, and you can find out more about Ruth Graham Ministries. And, of course, we also will see some material there. I know you're going to be on with James Robison, so people will be able to watch that on television as well. We have a lot more to cover with Ruth Graham, and we will do so right after this.
So when people first hear about MediShare, they have questions. Some good ones, like, what is it? Well, MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry. It's not health insurance. It's a different way of doing things, which leads us to this question. Why do so many become MediShare members? Two big reasons. They save a lot. The typical family saves $500 a month, and they feel great about it. With MediShare, you aren't forced to pay for things you don't believe in. Find out more. 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40.
It seems we can't get through a day without hearing how science has been corrupted to support political goals. Media entities have sold out truth for the sake of favored narratives. Even some religious groups have abandoned the Bible to support things based on feelings. So who can you trust? Kerby Anderson and the Point of View Truth Team are your source for real news. Learn how you can make a difference by joining the team at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. In a world of unending fog, Point of View is a shining light. Do your part at pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back for the final half hour, and if you would like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Although I suspect most of you want to just sit back and learn, so take some notes, because we have the privilege, just for a little bit longer, of Ruth Graham in studio with us as we talk about her book, Forgiving My Father, Forgiving Myself. It's published by Baker, about 200 pages. We have a link to her website. You can find that at pointofview.net. And I thought, Ruth, for just a few minutes, some of the middle part of your book really gets into some misconceptions that people have about forgiveness. And one of those is that forgiveness is natural, or that it's easy, or that's even an emotion. I mean, sometimes you have to give forgiveness even when you don't feel like it. Just like you have to pray sometimes when you don't feel like praying. Like sometimes you have to read, I hate to admit it, but this is true, even those of us that teach a seminary, read the Bible even when you don't feel like reading the Bible. And forgiveness is like that, isn't it?
It's a decision you make, and you can make that decision whether you feel like it or not. And A.W. Tozer said that when you make the decision, that's the doorway by which the Holy Spirit can enter that decision and enable us to do it. And I've found that true in my own life. But we can make that decision regardless. And it doesn't feel fair. It doesn't feel good. But God will inhabit that decision. And it is a lifetime process. It doesn't happen overnight. And we may make that decision and we think, oh, it's all done. But then a week later or 6 months later or a year later, the emotions come roaring back in like a tidal wave. And we think, I really didn't forgive. Yes, you did. You made the choice. You've driven a stake. I forgave on such and such a day. And you have to go back to that and renew your mind in the scriptures, and that God will do a work, but it may take a lifetime.
Yes. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that was where I was going to take it next, because you have this sense sometimes that I thought I forgave them, and I think maybe you did, but the emotions just don't fade away.
No, they don't.
And as you pointed out, time does not heal all wounds. Sometimes time buries all wounds, and then because you ask for forgiveness or because you surface it, some of those long buried emotions surface again. And, of course, we live in a world influenced by the world, the flesh, and the devil. And I don't know who I want to blame for any one of those emotions coming back, probably all three. But that's another reason why sometimes people think, well, I must not have forgiven them because I still have some of these feelings that I had back when that was actually done to me before.
Emotions don't tell us the truth.
Yeah.
They just are.
And so, again, one of the things that I've tried to say, as a matter of fact, recently we had one of the co-authors of the book, The Coddling of the American Mind, because we do some stuff with millennials, is the fact that a lot of millennials say, always trust your emotions. And I would say, if there's one thing that those of us that are a little bit older can pass on to you, emotions can actually take you in the wrong direction. Right. Okay, let's get into another thing that you talk about there, and that is the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. As a matter of fact, you even have one chapter there, Choices for the Wounded, where you talk about discernment. And if there is a word that sort of encapsulates almost everything we've been talking about over the last couple of months here at Point of View, it's the need for discernment. Discernment about fake news, discernment about all sorts of other issues. But one of those is the discernment as to whether or not, as I ask for forgiveness, is that person who I am asking to forgive me, or even a person who's asking me for forgiveness, if that's going to even lead to reconciliation. Because sometimes you can just deal with the forgiveness issue, but reconciliation just isn't necessarily the next step, is it?
Not at all. As a matter of fact, sometimes it would be unwise, especially in the case of abuse. You just need to remove yourself from some situations. But forgiveness is unconditional. We can grant forgiveness regardless. We make that decision. But reconciliation depends on the changed behavior of the one who's done the wounding. And they may come and say, oh, I've changed. They may weep on your shoulder. You need outside people to discern whether that person has really changed or not, because you can be fooled. And I was. With my fourth husband, I was totally fooled. And I believed him, but it wasn't the case. And I got in a heap of trouble with it. But I have a friend who I quote in the book, Ed Gunger, and he said, you can go to the zoo, you can look at the animals, you can appreciate the animals, the lions and the tigers, but you don't have to get in the cage with them. And that's true when we're in a relationship that's toxic or abusive. We have a spiritual responsibility to take care of our children. And if our children are in an abusive situation, we need to remove the children from that situation for their sake, for our sake. God does not ask us to stay in that kind of a place.
Yes. One of the things we've talked about with some regularity here on this program is physical abuse, spiritual abuse, and even I've written about verbal abuse and those kinds of things, because it doesn't seem to be the topics that are addressed from the pulpit. And so I've always felt like this is another way that we can do some biblical teaching, even if it isn't inside the church, because these are really important issues.
Absolutely. Good for you.
And it just seems to me that this is another place where we need some discernment, because even the other day when we were talking with one of the authors who has written a book on discernment, I said a lot of discernment isn't even biblical discernment. It's just common sense. If a person lies to you, then the next time they tell you a story, you need to be a little more skeptical. If a person has hurt you in any significant way, whether it's to hit you or just verbally undress you in front of everyone else, you need to just be a little bit more careful.
Trust but verify, is what Reagan would say.
And those are the kinds of things that I think really are part of what you're talking about here as well. Forgiveness doesn't mean that you're a doormat. Forgiveness doesn't mean that you ignore the past abuse or the past action. And so I think there's a really good balance there as well. Let me just, before we run out of time, because I did want to get a couple of the various illustrations there. One of those is, if you think about the difference, and I love this, how did Judas respond? How did Peter respond? It does seem to me that that's a very good illustration from the New Testament. We'll get to the Old Testament in just a minute, of two different ways you can respond when you've let somebody down, when you've failed somebody. And here is, I think, a great Bible story and also a biblical principle that we can apply in our own lives.
Well, certainly, Judas betrayed the Lord, and Peter denied him 3 times. So what was the difference? I think that Judas was disillusioned. He expected Jesus to be the conquering hero, to defeat Rome. And when that didn't happen, he was disillusioned. He was disappointed. And maybe he began to stand closer to the Pharisees, listen to their whispers, their anger, their malcontent. And he lost focus, if he ever had it.
Right.
And he began to doubt, and he decided, well, I will sell Jesus to them for 30 pieces of silver, and Jesus will probably walk away from the crowd anyway, because he's done that before. When things got out of hand, he just slipped away. So maybe that's what, I don't think Judas really ever meant to see it go that far. And when it did, I think he was horrified. But instead of going to the disciples, instead of going to God, he went to the Pharisees and the leaders who to whom he had betrayed Jesus, and they spat in his face and they threw the money on the ground and said, "We don't want anything more to do with you." How horrible that must have been for Judas. And to see that Jesus was going to be crucified, he knew Jesus was innocent. To know that, and he didn't have a remedy for that. He didn't go back to the disciples. So he went out and hung himself.
Yes.
Whereas Peter, he denied the Lord 3 times. He even cursed and swore he didn't know Jesus. But he went back to the disciples. We hear that he must have been in the room when the women came to say that Jesus was alive, and he ran to the tomb. He was eager because angel had said, "Go tell the disciples and Peter."
And Peter. Yeah,
Yes.
I just love the way that's added, because it just illustrates again, we right now are talking about forgiving other people, but sometimes the person that's hardest to forgive is yourself.
Absolutely.
And, you tell some stories in there, and all of us can tell stories of when we betrayed a confidence, when we gossiped about somebody, when we did something harmful, maybe even accidentally, and we found ourselves in a situation where really the person that was the hardest to forgive is us.
That's right.
We're oftentimes the most critical person in that whole situation. So we come back from the break. I want to talk about another story, because that's in the Old Testament, Jacob and Esau, because that gets into the idea of a blessing versus bitterness. And I thought that was another great illustration, because sometimes if you do not get forgiveness, if you do not move on, then sometimes that leads to a great deal of bitterness. And we are running into lots and lots of people today because of the bitterness that they have and the divisiveness that we have. So let me encourage you to go to our website today, and if you click on the picture of Ruth Graham, you will find that we have a link to ruthgraham.com. We have a great deal of information about what is happening at Ruth Graham Ministries, so you can follow that as well. You can also sign up and receive the newsletter. So let me encourage everybody to put your email and your address down there, and then you can actually know a little bit more about what Ruth Graham Ministries is doing. And I hope that those of you that maybe are in one way or another looking for some of the advice that is in this book will take a copy of the book, but also get some of that material on our website or go to Ruth Graham's ministry as well. Let's take a break, though. We have a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes in studio with us, Ruth Graham. And let me just mention that, first of all, we have a link to her website. I would encourage you to go there and sign up and receive some of the great material that is available through Ruth Graham Ministries. Number two, you might say, I know some people that might benefit from this right now. They're struggling with this issue of forgiveness. Now, obviously, you might want to buy them a copy of the book, but in the meantime, we have on our website a watch and listen. The listen is you could download the podcast and just send it to them. The watch is, of course, they could watch it right now, or you can just simply go to our YouTube channel. In about an hour, it'll be up there, and you can actually watch this and pass it on to them. And this might just be a real encouragement. So let me encourage all of you listening to think about someone you might want to pass this on to, and that would really be, I think, a tremendous blessing for Ruth Graham, who obviously has spent a fair amount of time writing this book and doing this author tour. But let me, if I can for just a minute, Chapter 9, Blessings Not Bitterness, Jacob and Esau. And I think that's a great illustration because I run into bitter people all the time who cannot get over something that happened to them in their past. And as horrific in some cases that it is, I'm not minimizing what happened to them. If they can't get over it, they're never going to be better if they're always bitter, right?
I was certainly bitter after my husband's infidelities, and remained bitter for quite a while. And Jacob and Esau were classic. They were sibling rivals. I mean, you talk about rivalry and favoritism. Rebekah favored Jacob, and Isaac favored Esau. And favoritism tears a family apart.
Yes, it does.
You can't allow that to happen, but it happened. And Jacob stole, or didn't steal from, Esau thought he'd stolen the birthright from him, but actually Esau sold it to him when he thought it was worthless. He just wanted a pot of stew. He was hungry. He was famished. He thought he'd die if he didn't have the stew. And so Jacob said, okay, then give me the birthright. And that was key in those days. I mean, that was the father's blessing. That was the father's inheritance. I mean, the other kids didn't get anything. It was the firstborn son. And so Esau sold it to him for a pot of stew. And Jacob took off and he took it. He wasn't going to give it back. And then when Jacob realized what had happened, when Esau realized what he was so angry, he vowed to kill his brother.
Right.
And his mother overheard that and said, you need to go be with your uncle Laban. So Jacob had to serve his uncle Laban for a long time to get the bride that he really wanted.
Yes.
And his uncle treated him the way that he had treated Esau in so many ways. Deceit ran in the family. Talk about a generational sin.
I used to call it broken branches in your family tree from Abraham all the way to Joseph. I mean, what a mess in Genesis.
Well, all of God's children are a mess, even
That's
today.
Right. Yes.
But Jacob decided, well, they had to see each other. And Jacob sent his wives and his children ahead because I guess he felt like Esau wouldn't kill them first.
Right.
But the Lord met him at the brook Jabbok, and Jacob wrestled with him all night until the Lord touched his thigh, and he was crippled from then on. But he was no longer bitter, and he and Esau made up. I mean, they were not going to be bosom buddies, but they made up, and they traveled together, and they served one another. So bitterness doesn't have to be bitterness. You can get rid of it.
Yeah.
You can get rid of it. And I know for me, I was very bitter towards my husband. And I'm sure I did my children undue harm by making snide remarks about their father.
Mm-hmm.
And that was lasting bitterness. But the Lord has taken care of that.
Yes. Well, and a good example, I've seen this in families where sometimes the parents have not treated them well, and one son or daughter says, well, that's just, they have that problem, and I'm not going to make it my problem. Mm-hmm. And the other holds on to that bitterness for the rest of their lives, and it's just incredible. One of the other chapters I thought we might talk about, what if I still can't forgive? Again, I love the practical nature of your book because you recognize that sometimes it isn't easy to forgive. It's not an emotion that just naturally comes into me one day and say, I'm going to be so forgiving. But what about this idea of some people just simply saying, you know what, I just can't bring myself to forgive? What would you say to them?
Well, that's the case where you have to just pray. If you really want to forgive, then you need to pray and ask the Holy Spirit to help you do it. It's not easy. It's unfair. It's not natural. Forgiveness is tough work. But the Holy Spirit does the tough work once we give him the opportunity. And he does it in a marvelous way. And I've seen it happen in my own life, in the lives of my children. And I know that forgiveness is transformative and it's worth the hard work. It's worth the sacrifice you have to make. It's worth the humbling of yourself to ask for forgiveness. And I've had to do that too.
Yes.
But it's worth it. And I remember one Easter Sunday, I'd put my children through so much. And I gathered in the backyard of my daughter's house. We're overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains. And we were talking about things. And finally I said, I need to talk to you all about something. And I sent the children away to play. And my children blanched. They thought I was either really sick or something was really wrong. I said, no. I said, I need to ask each one of you to forgive me. Oh, Mother, we don't need to forgive you. That's not an issue. I said, no, I need to know that you all have forgiven me. I looked at each one of them in the eye and I said, will you forgive me?
Mm-hmm.
And each one said, yes, Mother, we forgive you. What a freeing thing that is.
Yes.
Hard? Yes, I'm the mother. I'm supposed to have it all together. But freeing to have my children forgive me. I dedicate the book to them because their forgiveness has been so unmeasured.
You end the book by talking about the importance of intimacy with God.
Yes.
And a lot of that really has to do with, like you say, praying, spending time in God's Word, and recognizing that this is what God calls you to do, even though it may be a very difficult road to walk down,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Absolutely. But he walks with us.
Yeah.
We're never alone. He walks with us and he will see us through. You know, we may not feel that way. We may feel absolutely opposite, but God will see us through. And we're invited into the miracle of forgiveness. And forgiveness is transformative. It's transformed my life. It's transformed my children's lives. It's transformed my family's life. And it is a miracle that we are invited into the very nature and character of God. It is a holy, sacred thing.
We have a link to your website. When people land on your website, what will they find? Because there's some great resources, aren't there?
There will be resources, and they can order the book. They can find out more about me and what I do.
And again, I think it is, again, one of the links that we have provided there. We do have a link to the book itself and, of course, ruthgraham.com. And I might just mention that people can be watching for you on television because you're going to be going from here to tape a program with our friends at Life Today. So that's information already there. And you've already taped one, I guess, with Sheila Walsh.
Two of them.
Yeah,
Two of
so,
them. So that's great.
you got James and Betty Robinson tonight. And that, so you'll be watching those. And again, if you're on the website that you have or you sign up for the newsletter, you'll know all about that. So, Ruth, I appreciate you coming by. Of course, we've known many members of your family, and it has just
there are lots of Grahams.
Yeah, and it has just been a delight to have you in studio.
So nice to be here with you. Thank you very much.
That's all we have for today. And so if you find yourself saying that I'd really like to maybe hear this again, or I know somebody that really would benefit from this, just again, go to the website, pointofview.net. What you'll see in the upper right-hand corner is a little red box, one that says listen, and that will allow you to download the podcast, and you could just immediately send that to anybody by email, or you could post it on your Facebook page or Twitter page or something like that for people to follow the interview. Or we also have the button that says watch, and you, of course, watch it right now. Of course, it'll be on YouTube very shortly, and you can watch that as well. And this is a very important issue of forgiveness, and this is why we wanted to dedicate an hour to that, especially since we have Ruth Graham in studio. So that's all we have for today. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. I hope you'll join us tomorrow right here on Point of View.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.